Welcome to this very special edition of The Author's Voice with KAJ, a show where we explore the stories behind the stories. Here we dive into the worlds created by authors, discover their inspirations, and ensure that you walk away enriched and inspired. And today we have with us author D.H. Morris. He is a native of San Diego, California, has lived in 4 continents, resides in Kansas City, Missouri, has 4 children, 11 grandchildren, and she is a published playwright and the author of the book, The Girl of Many Crowns. We'll be talking about that story itself, but we'll hear most of the things from her, rather than try talking about it. Welcome to the show, Deborah.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show once again, and this time on The Author's Voice with KJ. So, Deborah, before, as I said, no use of me telling about you. It's rather, so if you can tell a bit about your background, your journey, so that people know, and why this story, how this story came along, so that people know who they are listening to.
Well, the story, the way I learned about this story was from my aunt. My aunt was a family genealogist. She loved to trace our family history. And when my husband and I got married, she gave us as a gift an enormous table-sized family tree chart and a book of ancestors. As I was looking at the chart, I noticed the name of a 12-year-old princess who was married to a 50-year-old king, and then 2 years later was married to another king, his son, and then 3 years after that was married to a count. And I thought, there's something wrong here. This either everyone who had a daughter born the same year named her the same thing, which was Judith, or we have an error on our family history. So I started digging into it, thinking I would correct that. And instead, I found the most fascinating story. It seemed very improbable. And it stayed with me for many years. And then when COVID came, I decided I've done some research on this, but if I want the story to be told for my family, then I really need to finish the research. So I did a lot of research. I devoted myself to researching the 9th century, her father, all what was going on in the world at that time. And I found that this was actually a very critical time in the birth of what we know now as Europe. This is when the kingdoms were being formed and they were fighting for their land. So I decided that I would write the story for my family. And then I had some friends say, no, you need to write this for further publication so that everyone can know about this story. So that is what I did.
Absolutely, and that is what you did, and that is what resulted in this book of yours, The Girl of Many Crowns. It's just the crown is behind you, there, Deborah, and here I have also got the crown here on the right, and that this story speaks about a lot of things. So, how did you get to writing this book, Deborah? It is not a easy book to write. You have to look at history. You have to look at correctness of that. It's your family's history also. So you have emotions also, different sort of emotions involved here. So how did you get down to writing this story? Do justice? Did you treat it as history? Did you treat it as a love story between Judith and her knight in shining armor later on who protected her? So help us understand through that process of yours, Deborah?
First started by approaching it just as history, just trying to get the accurate events and times, places, everything right. And unfortunately, that meant that the book was very, very long. And I had many footnotes, and I had a lot of bibliography at the end of books that you could look for further information. And then I realized that even my family found that it was a lot to go through. It was a lot of history. So I thought, I need to make this book read like a novel, even though all the events in there are true. The research that I did, how I went about that was I started, first of all, I looked her up on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a good resource to start with, but you have to be careful because there are a lot of errors in Wikipedia. But the real gold in Wikipedia is at the end of the article. You see a lot of actual sources, and some of them you can actually click on. And when you click on it, it will take you to the original source. You can read original accounts from the 9th century, in my case, which was what I was researching. That's probably where I discovered the works of Janet L. Nelson. She is one of the premier medieval scholars in the world for this time period. She devoted much of her research and writing. She's a British scholar and a teacher, I believe, at Oxford, or teacher emeritus now. But she wrote about Charles the Bald, who is Judith's father. And reading her works, I was able to find out what was going on in Judith's world and put that into the book so that you would know why she made certain decisions, why her father made certain decisions for her. Also, Janet Nelson had translated something called the Annals of St. Burton. Those are diaries, if you will, or annals that were kept by the monks in the 9th century. So at the end of each year, they would write a summary of what had happened that year. The book covers 7 years, 7 very critical years, actually, in the formation of Europe, as well as in Judith's life. And so I went year by year. I just would read what happened that year. I would research more on that. And if I came to a new place, I would research what was 9th century Paris like, for instance, or 9th century Aachen or whatever. And I would be very specific and try to be as accurate as possible to bring the reader into that time period. I researched things on what food they had, how they traveled, what they wore, the jewelry they had, their celebrations. I was not raised Catholic, but most people in Judith's world were either Catholic or pagan. Well, in her world, mostly Catholic. There were some Jews, but they didn't really factor into the story. So I had to research also what was the Catholic Church like during the 9th century? And what were the popes like? In these 7 years, they went through 3 or 4 popes. And it's very interesting because there's a lot of turmoil not just in the empire, but in the church as well. And then also she marries the King of Wessex. So I had to go cross the channel and do research about 9th century England and what was going on there. There are Viking attacks constantly. There are assassination plots. There are rebel lords. There's political intrigue of all kinds. And King Charles, his country, well, his kingdom is being threatened by his brother, Louis the German. And if Louis had won the war, and there's a war that takes place during the book, there would have been no France. They would have all been speaking German. So I approached the writing from an historical perspective, primarily. And then when I went back and saw what kind of turmoil and challenges they were facing, that's where you have to put yourself in their position. And you have to say, what would I feel like if I were a 12-year-old girl being married off for political reasons, leaving my country, leaving everything I knew, and the person is old enough to be my grandfather? How would I feel? And how would I feel if I were forced to marry again? Only this time, one of his rebellious son. And then how would I feel if I come back to France and my father says, I'm going to put you in prison for the rest of your life if you don't agree to marry a third time? So all of those emotions basically came from my perspective, I would say, because we can't ask Judith how she felt about it. But we do know that she was willing to be imprisoned for the rest of her life rather than agree to a third marriage. So she couldn't have enjoyed the first or second marriage as much as we would like to think. And then Baldwin, who is her knight in shining armor, he was the companion of her younger brother and a mentor to her younger brother. So although we don't have a lot of specifics about Baldwin, because he was the companion of her younger brother, I simply put him in all the situations as companion to her younger brother. We know where he was. We know what he was doing. And then when he helps Judith to escape, I had to figure out, how would that feel? How did they come to that decision? Because they were going to risk their lives in this adventure that they were going to go on together. And it was, and from there on, again, I took the events and the times and the places they ended up and just tried to imagine how I would feel if I were on the run for my life from my father, etc.
Absolutely. So, Deborah, I want to understand your mind at that point in time. First, you started writing it as history. It's a very difficult thing with whatever information you got, because it was also your family history in that sense, about your ancestors. And then if you started looking at it from a love story, then also it was again tinkering on the borders of history. Along with history, you have to make sure that love story also, and because it is also the story of your ancestors, it is about you. How did you manage all these things? Were you going through different emotions at the same time? Did the realization also come to you that whatever every word that you want, purists will have a look at it and give their opinion on that? Because if I don't know much about that history, but what I have known is that Emperor I don't know how to pronounce his name, but she was the grandson
Charlemagne.
of,
Yeah.
huh?
Charlemagne.
Yeah, Charlemagne. So he's not anybody. He is Emperor Charlemagne. And people, there have been, even in very recent history, there have been, if I understand, it's the same person in their name, brigades were formed, and so many people look at it. So in that sense, it's a very, very, you can say, difficult stage to walk on. How did you manage? Were you even aware of it, or you detached yourself from everything else and looked at it purely as a writer?
A little of both. I wanted it to be interesting, so I had to look at it as a writer or reader would. But I also believe that maybe someday after I die, maybe I'll meet these people. And I don't want to be to face them and have them say, why did you think I did that or said that? So I was trying to be sensitive to that aspect of it. I wanted it to be an inspiration to people. I did not want, I mean, if you're going to write about a love story about your ancestors, you're not going to write a very explicit sexual scenes. I would not. Um, would you write that about your grandparents, for instance, and how they met? No, that's more of a private thing between them. So for me, it was more, how did their relationship develop? He was her brother's companion, so she would have known him. How did it develop eventually into this romance, and strong enough that they were willing to defy the empire and elope? And so that is, I wrote what I felt was made the most sense to me, was the most probable way that it happened. But there are many different interpretations. People could say, well, I don't think they did that. We will never know completely how they fell in love. We just know that they did. And how that happened, I believe, started as a friendship and grew from there. That was my decision, and I feel comfortable with it.
Absolutely. And I wonder, last time I also asked, but can't help myself asking, while you were writing those scenes about that running, away for their life, for their, away from the king's men. And every time even if the reader looks at it differently, what about you? Every word that you write, it also means that at any point their journey was jeopardized. The timeline of the future will get wiped out, and you would not be existing at all. You know the truth, but it can be very difficult and scary also, and ironical as well as happy way you can look at it. What were your feelings at that point in time, writing scenes almost about yourself, about the future of the whole generations?
Yes, it is. You're very right. It occurred to me on a number of occasions that if one little thing had happened differently, none of this would have occurred. And the whole world would have been different, not just my personal ancestry, but Europe would have been a completely different entity from what we see it at now. I found that I did get emotionally involved in some of the scenes. I was very emotionally involved when I was writing her decision to marry Baldwin. And that one, I think, brought a tear to my eyes because I saw her as having been poorly used in her second marriage. Again, that is my opinion. I draw that from the fact that her second husband, who was the son of her first husband, she only knew from the negative things that he had done. He tried to steal his father's kingdom. He banished his father and Judith from even entering his part of the kingdom when he stole half of the kingdom. And then she ends up being married to him. And at the end of his existence, I guess, after he dies, his kingdom is starting to fall into crime and corruption. So I'm thinking he wasn't the best husband, not the kindest man. And that's where I approached that from. And then with his abuse of her, that would make, I thought, what would make me refuse to marry again at my father's command? That would do it. You would think, okay, is there something worse than being imprisoned? Maybe. Maybe it's being in a relationship where someone is abusing you. And so when she reunites with Baldwin, whom she had known earlier as a child, and she sees his gentleness and his consideration, that was what she was missing from her second marriage. And so that's how I approached that. There were times when I was I sensed the danger, especially, as you said, when they were running from King Charles. And I was thinking, there's one scene in the book where a bear tries to attack them. Now, this is something that I took from the history of the city of Bruges. Bruges, which is now in Belgium, was in Flanders at that time. And they consider Baldwin and Judith to be essentially their founding couple. And they have this story of Baldwin and Judith fleeing from King Charles and being attacked by the bear, and Baldwin protecting her and killing the bear. So even in Bruges today, they sell Bear of Bruges chocolates and Bear of Bruges beer. So I couldn't leave that story untold because it's part of their history too. And so, yeah, I felt like, wow, if he had not reacted quickly, she would have been dead. And he might have also. So there were a lot of places along the way when I thought she was in danger. She says in the book, I have her say that her life was filled with many little miracles. And I think that's true of all of us. When we look back, we can see there are times when if things had not gone just right, we might not be here, or definitely we would have taken a bad turn. so I think we're all blessed by angels or whatever in a way, and our lives are filled with little miracles, and we need to appreciate those and look for those every day. And so I think her story is very inspirational to me because of that. She was strong, she was powerful in her own way, and Baldwin, of course, is powerful physically and in his own way, very strong, because he's willing to leave the service of the king whom he had pledged his loyalty to and risk everything to save his daughter. And it turned out for them. I mean, they have struggles along the way, but it eventually ends happily, or as you say, I wouldn't be here, and any of their descendants would not be here.
And this episode would not be there then, and the other episode also. So I want to understand, about all through all these things, their difficulties, their challenges. What was the most challenging part for you, during writing this book?
Well, at first it was trying to decide who was going to be the voice in the book, from what perspective. I tried writing it from Baldwin's, it wasn't working. I tried writing it from Judith's, it wasn't working, because they get separated. And really, this story is not just Judith's story. In fact, when my husband and my son read the book, they said, "This is not Judith's book, this is Baldwin's book." And I said, "What?" It was a surprise to me. But then I realized it's their story, because when she goes to England, we follow still what is happening in France through Baldwin's eyes. So we have Baldwin's perspective, and we have Judith's perspective, and then we have King Charles's perspective through his main counselor, whose name is Hincmar. He was the Archbishop of Reims, and he was a very powerful figure of the 9th century, but I had never heard of him. So again, more research, finding out what he had written and why people thought he was so powerful. He's an amazing figure, actually. So he lets us know what is going on from King Charles's perspective. And then we run in parallel Judith and Baldwin until they decide to elope. Then we have just King Charles' perspective through Hincmar and the couple's perspective, because it really is their story, how they came through separate paths, very challenging paths, both of them, to unite as a couple and go forward.
Absolutely. So from this book, what uh, insights, key message that you want readers of this book to take away with themselves?
I didn't set out to put themes in the book, but they just arose from the story itself. They're inherent to the story. There are so many themes that you could talk about. What is loyalty to king, to country? What is loyalty to family? What is whether you should believe rumor? There's rumors going around, or how do you tell rumor from truth? How should the church and the state interact, or should they? So many little themes in there: courage, faith, loyalty, and love. And what would you do for love?
Absolutely, absolutely. What would you do for love? And love has so many things you can look from this particular book. Any particular favorite scene from this book of your own? From this book, maybe about the tier one that you talked about, or is it something different?
That would be one of them, but I also included some fun scenes in there in order to lighten up the book. Sometimes there would be a gap. The monks did not write about Judith so much that year. And so, sorry, I have a frog in my throat. And so I needed to find out, what was she doing? So I looked at 9th century holiday celebrations. How did they celebrate Easter? How did they celebrate Christmas? How did they celebrate other fun celebrations that they had? Did they have any that we don't have now? Yes, they did. And so I really enjoyed writing some of those scenes because we see time pass with Judith, and I put her in actual descriptions of celebrations that I came across. So that is very interesting. That was a lot of fun to write, actually. And I don't know if I have one. There's one where for their Christmas celebration, they are actually playing what sounds like a precursor to football or rugby. And it's a new game. And they are, the princes in England are doing it because this is a tradition that has started in Wales, where they are either vying for something like a big bag of something, they're throwing it around, they're carrying it across lines to get scores. And some of them even use a boar's head. So that was a fun scene to have in there, because this actually started just within a few years of the time in the book. So it's a fun scene. It really is. They're playing soccer, early soccer or football. I
Absolutely,
tried
early.
to, whenever I found out anything about the time period or one of the characters, I tried to find a way to incorporate that into a scene. So, for instance, Judith's mother was very well renowned for her embroidery. She was a beautiful seamstress. Her embroidery work was adorned all the cathedrals in their altar cloths and things like that. So I have a scene where Judith and her mother are embroidering together because her mother was known for that. And anything that I found of an event or a place or a person that was there at the time, I tried to turn that into a scene or part of a scene. If I found a poem that was written during that time, I would use it. A song, I would use that. A riddle, it would be taken in and used. At one point, when I was doing research on Catholic celebrations of that time, I went to a Catholic website and found an actual description of a 9th century French Easter celebration. And I thought, that's perfect. I've got to use this somehow. And it even had the song the children were singing. It had a description of everything that they did. It was marvelous. So I included that in the book.
Absolutely, absolutely. And now, not just this book, now you are writing a prequel
Yes.
to this particular book. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, Judith was named for her grandmother, Judith. Her grandmother, Judith, was an empress. She was married to Charlemagne's son, Louis the Pious. She was his second wife, and she was selected during a bride show. When his first wife died, his counselors wanted him to marry again. And so they asked all the nobles throughout the empire who had beautiful and intelligent and talented young daughters to bring them to the capital, which was Aix-la-Chapelle, or Aachen today in Germany, and kind of display the daughters for the king's choice. And it was very unusual, but Judith, the empress, was selected that way and became empress. And it was almost a Cinderella type story in a way because of that, until she gave birth to a son, Charles. And when King Charles was born, he wasn't king, of course, then, but when Charles was born, he had 3 living older brothers, stepbrothers, because from the first marriage of Louis the Pious. They had already decided how they were going to divide the country or the empire. And there was no place for a fourth, and they didn't want him there. So then it's up to Empress Judith to try to save his life and protect him. And there's wars, there's civil war breaks out, and she's a big part of it. And they capture and imprison their own father, the sons do. So Louis the Pious is held imprisoned. They imprison Judith. They make all kinds of accusations against her to try to get her and her son thrown out. But everything they do obviously doesn't work because King Charles eventually ends up with his part of the kingdom. And that will be the story in the prequel. And then, as you can see, The Girl of Many Crowns picks up from there when King Charles has his own daughter to marry off, and he's still fighting for his kingdom, still trying to protect the borders from his brother, Louis the German.
Absolutely, absolutely. So many things to learn about history, so many things to learn about life at that time, and so many things. But if you look at it from your point of view, both are these books. One already in out here, and second, you in the writing. Is that it's not just about stories. It's not just about your ancestors. It's also about your legacy. What do you want your writing to leave behind for the world?
I want people to feel informed about a period of time they have never perhaps looked at before, because very few people write about this period of time. And it's actually an amazing period of time. It's called the Carolingian Renaissance. it's in the middle of the Dark Ages, and there's this short period of time when education is flourishing, when you know, culture and beauty. And a lot of the times when we look at the Viking Age, which this is, it only shows the dark side. It looks like everybody's covered with dirt and everybody's kind of out there trying to kill each other. Nobody can read. It wasn't like that. And so I want people to know a little bit more about this fascinating time and about the birth of Europe. And then also, I want people to be inspired in their own lives, to have courage, to have strength, to know that you can make it through. Even if you're facing incredible challenges, just keep going, trying to make the best decisions from day to day. And things can work out. So many books end with such sadness and misery. This is a true life story, true hero and heroine who have a happy ending. So it can happen. And if you look at life from an optimistic point of view and with hope, it's a wonderful thing. You can enjoy your life much more.
Absolutely. There's so much to learn from you, from your books, and I'm sure a lot of people would want to get hold of this book, want to be in touch with you, also know more about the prequel that you are working on. So what is the best way for them to connect with you, Deborah?
If they want to connect with me, they can email me at dhmorris00@gmail.com. And if they want to purchase The Girl of Many Crowns, they can go to Amazon. There's Barnes and Noble. There's Apple Books. There's a number of different sites that will carry this, at least in the ebook version. As far as the audiobook, that should be coming out this month.
Wonderful. And the prequel, when is that coming out?
We hope the audiobook will be ready to release within a couple of weeks.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the Author's Voice with KAJ. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.